There are certain elements of strategic relations that I do not discuss generally in public, but they're important to understand because they improve your own ability to cultivate the person you need to be to have influence, power, and control in the marketplace. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. Stop any professional and ask them the question about what has influenced other people. And they will tell you education, society, and the general environment in which those people work. But if you ask them what influences them, they very often will not attribute those elements to their own influence. The truth is that you can be influenced by outside and internal factors, and there are mass control tools that cause societies to function a certain way or have a certain specific set of beliefs. Now, if you think that this is something that just happens over the nature of society and humans working together, then you are less informed than those who have been with me for a while on the newsletter, because what's actually possible is mass control methods that help shape populations, cultures, and the way individuals interact with each other. This is not some kind of conspiracy. It's just like if you have a small group, the strong leader will establish the culture and the operating performance and what is expected. I'm going to share with you today a few highlights of what we talk about in the private coaching and how these are practical and easy to implement methods that you're going to see everywhere in society once you realize that this kind of mass control is available. Now, by no means am I advocating using these methods to control other people for personal gain. Yet these methods are constantly in use, and once you understand them, you will realize that you're probably already using them and people around you are using them, but you could use them more effectively to shape your future. Now, some of the topics I'm going to share are not politically correct. I'm not talking about a specific society or a specific type of people or a specific belief system. My role is to basically deliver a framework, and then your individual ethics will drive you towards the application of that framework. And what's very important here is that this is not some esoteric insight that I came up with on my own. It's actually documented in books throughout history. One such book is The True Believer by Eric Hoffer, which shows how mass movements can be cultivated and created. And it's actually done through the same mechanisms we use to become educated for a career or to approach a specific problem. If you're looking at how societies are shaped, they're primarily shaped by the education of the youth. So most movements are youth movements. Youth don't have a lot of context about worldviews, and they ultimately will follow a strong leader. Now, I'm going to share with you I've got 6 simple insights that will help you utilize this concept to build a better future for yourself and family. And you can actually expand this through the relationship realms and really build a powerful community of value. Again, I'm not pushing one direction or another or any political elements. That's really up for you to decide. But the mechanism is the same. And I'm going to leave you with this phrase to get started. If you erase someone's past, you can destroy their future. There is a concept that we are in a timeline, kind of a temporal state. We really only experience the now. Now, there are mental conditions where you can be plagued by the past or you can overestimate the future, but ultimately we're physically in the present. If you can erase the past, you now have an empty slot, kind of an empty space that you can fill with a narrative that can build someone's future or can destroy someone's future. So let me give you a simple example in history. There's 2 simple examples. There's many more, by the way, because this is a mechanism that dictators and fascists and Marxists and communists and all these people use in order to control populations. But for example, what Hitler did was remove the history of the Jewish people, of different minority and ethnic groups, and actually erased their contributions to society in many ways through omission, in many ways through just simply denying it and replacing it with a new belief that favored his Third Reich and the concept, the mythology of that governmental organization. Now, this turned out very, very bad. There are people today that argue about how bad it was or how it wasn't bad, but it was a scar on humanity to destroy so much to achieve so little. And in fact, the achievement only works out in a very narrow perspective. So you can even question whether the achievement or there was any value in such a system that would erase someone's past in order to control them or to destroy their future or to make them less of a competitor in what otherwise is a very competitive world economy. These traits, when people use these mass control techniques, they tend to go from a broad perspective of understanding to a very narrow, curated understanding. And it happens in cults as well. And another example is Mao in the Cultural Revolution. Mao sought to erase all the traditional Chinese concepts and understanding, the world of Confucius, the different dynasties, and replace it with a new way of thinking that said that the past was bad. We made all these mistakes in the past, and we're going to glorify this new future. And they actually lived in the future so much that when things started failing, such as the famine, they erase, in fact, the agricultural concepts, and then they have a famine, and now they have to bring back concepts kind of curated, cherry-picked. And now you might be saying, well, Justin, these are like huge historical events. Well, how does this matter in my own life? Well, have you ever had that relative that maybe had a drug problem or an alcohol problem, and they're just kind of the black sheep of the family, and you ignored them? You forgot about the times where they had problems in the past because you just don't talk to them anymore. And they've been excommunicated from the family, so to say, and they just don't exist anymore. You've erased them emotionally. You understand, hey, they got these problems. I'm not going to expect a whole lot from them. See, we do this in everyday life. We do this with children. We do this with adults. We do this with peers. And when you can disconnect yourself from that judgment and focus that energy on your own cultivation and growth, something magical happens. There's a saying that, but for the grace of God go I. So you see somebody who's a complete idiot. Everybody would agree they're a complete idiot. And you say they're a complete idiot. You have no value in that. Nothing. You haven't been elevated. You haven't benefited anything. In fact, you just put down the other person. But they might not even know that you put them down. So they're going to go on with their stupid ways. And there's no value. But if you look at that person and say, look, except for my experiences, my education, and my influences, that could be me. But for the grace of God go I, they say. And if you do this, what is the value in that? Well, the value in that is that you're recognizing the distraction, the failure, the problems the other person has, and then judging yourself in that shaping or that change. Hey, look, you got a relative that drinks too much. My grandfather had Parkinson's, and he self-medicated heavily as things started coming along. And this was before Parkinson's was really known well. But he also had some traumatic events when he was in the Korean War. And we pretty much ignored him. He sat on the couch, watched the college football games, drank alcohol, and even just saying this, there will be family members that will be like, well, why do you put the dirty laundry out? But what I'm saying here is that the same mechanism that creates shame in a family or a community, the Amish community, for example, if you leave the Amish community, you're shunned. Well, that's turning your back on your family. How could you do that? These same mechanisms can be used in mass control. So a government can say, hey, look, our past has been sinful, and we've wasted resources and time, and we've failed, and we apologize, and we're going to do better in the future. Well, that's great for politics. That's great to get votes. That's great to acknowledge our, having a struggle session and acknowledge our failures. But it does nothing for the individual involved in that mechanism of control, but everything for the leader who removes the sin. Now, this mechanism also works in church as well. People go to confession to release the burden of their transgressions and to receive a blessing or someone to say, hey, I understand, say 5 Hail Marys and come back. Now, I'm oversimplifying things, but people do prayer circles, for example, to discuss their problems. That gives power to someone else. Now, I'm not saying you don't discuss your problems. What I'm saying instead is to understand that past is the foundation of where you are today. And you don't need to glorify the strengths and ignore the weaknesses. And you don't need to suppress the weaknesses to glorify the strengths. And you don't need to equally look at both out of an equity of ideas. But you do need to learn from the past so that you can have a better future through the behavior that you have right now. See, we only really do live in the presence. Now, the book The True Believer talks about how states, organizations that are governmental in nature, use historical events, present opinion, and they use it to shape the future that they desire. Now, what I'm going to argue is that you can do the same thing in your own life because tradition and culture create stability at scale. Yet it can also create conflict, don't get me wrong, but a strong understanding of who you are and how you got to where you are today builds a foundation that you need to go further in life. Now, I've been working on a project for years called my Wall of Fame. It's a bibliography or a biography project. Now, what I do, and we're going to start giving you some of those recommendations here, is that I've actually looked at historical figures who have had challenges far larger than the challenges I've had as a juxtaposition against my current struggles or frustrations rather than externalizing those struggles and frustrations. So let me make that in simple terms. When I was having problems in a business and facing bankruptcy, I looked into history and looked at how have others faced bankruptcy. Are there any successful people today who have been bankrupt in the past? Now, it's very easy to say, yes, there are, and then use that as an excuse to go through with dumb decisions. But if you go and read their biographies and you start understanding the context of their time, their decision-making process, and their approach, you will actually realize that your situation, first off, it's temporary. So if you're in a difficult financial situation, maybe you were making 6 figures last year, but now you've been laid off, or you've been stuck. You couldn't go into the office for a year, and now you have to work a less paid job, and you feel like you've been demoted, and you've been let down your family, and you can't provide anymore. Well, has there ever been a situation where somebody who is powerful today, who is in a high level of influence today, actually shined shoes and wasn't in a privileged status, who struggled for a few years while they found their ground again? And what you'll discover is there are thousands of examples. I actually wrote a special report for a client about all of the famous executives who started out as shoeshine boys or some kind of menial labor job, as it would be said. The fact is, you'll start understanding there is no such thing as a menial labor job. That all jobs have equal value as long as the marketplace is there for that value. People still make buggy whips, by the way. They find different customers, they find different approaches, they find it a different perspective. But my point being is, by the reading of biographies, you can very often remove yourself from the current and the pressing pressures and start to understand that this too shall pass. See, there's wisdom in our history. And if we erase it, we lose that wisdom for our future. The very first place you used to start, by the way, is in your genealogy. If you don't know the occupations, the experiences, the struggles of your immediate family members, you'll be disconnected with your potential. So, for example, maybe your parents were not that well off. Maybe they didn't do the things that were necessary to be in a status position, and now you look down on them because you got the college degree. You're making six figures. And in this blindness will come across you where you miss the fact that, well, with inflation, your six figures might have less buying power than your parents. You may actually have a more physical and a more consumer lifestyle, yet your parents had better quality of life, and their grandparents before them an even better quality of life. Now, it is entirely possible that you've got bastards in your family that are just real asses, and you don't want to ignore them. You want to learn from their mistakes. My grandfather was self-medicating because he had Parkinson's, but all those years moving into the actual Parkinson's diagnosis, we just thought he was a drunk, and we treated him like that, and that's disrespectful. The fact of the matter is he had experiences in the Korean War that were not addressed. And he was drinking alcohol to calm his nerve. And he would shake when he hadn't drank. And we were thinking, well, he's just, he's coming down off of being drunk. No, he had a neurological disorder that was physically eating away at his ability. And he was too proud to say, hey, I need some help. Now, ultimately, this genealogy will also unlock an understanding or a history that may be contrary to the public popular belief. So doing my own genealogy, I learned things about Booker T. Washington. I learned things about how the different political systems were working prior to the Civil War. I learned about family members who did great and family members that did poorly. I've personally been able to trace my history back to our first coming to the Americas, and then to our several generations and the generations of immigrants, the generations of even colonists. This is grounding for you because it establishes that you are more than just who you are today. In fact, you're the result of not only society, not only culture, but also biology. And there are uniquenesses in your family that may make you think twice about how you treat other people. I'm not going to have time to cover all 6 elements here, but I want you to understand that these little sayings like "judge not lest ye be judged," these are actually mnemonic triggers to larger concepts that we explore in the private membership area. And very often they are unspoken by the general population because most people are just trying to get day-to-day activities taken care of. They're struggling. They're frustrated. They think the government needs to save them, and they blame someone else, and they look for an easy scapegoat. That's what Hitler did. That's what Mao did. That's what people on all sides of the political spectrum do because, again, there's these mass control methods, such as the one I just shared today. If you erase someone's past, you can destroy their future. But what if you build up your past through understanding, through non-judgmental views and looking at historical context? Is it possible that you can build a better future? Well, it is. When you hear Martin Luther King talk about the content of character, where does that content of character come from? Well, character is a skill you can develop. It's how you interact with people. It's how you treat yourself. And so you need to, and it's number 3 on my list here, you need to cultivate your own character. Now, this could mean in some cases that you become an actor for the outside world. Now, we see this exaggerated in social media, but you may have a business persona and a family persona, and never the two shall meet. At business, you might be aggressive, you might be forward-thinking, you might be challenging to people, you might go into a marketplace and just aggressively challenge the status quo. But at home, you might play a more traditional role. Or you may not play a traditional role. You've got to make the decision. But if you're aggressive and demanding and you take that home, it isn't going to work out well for you. So the cultivation of character not only is in how you behave, but also the ethics of your belief. And so when you start understanding these more advanced technologies or techniques to mass control or to scale your current influence, you've got to also put the brakes on some of it. And you have to understand the appropriateness of the environment. And that's where communication comes in. That's where becoming a person of wisdom really matters. In fact, number 5 here is be a thinker beyond society. See, if you spend a lot of time reading biographies, you're going to realize that there have been successful people of all creeds, all cultures, all backgrounds, all abilities. And then when you hear a narrative today that there's an oppressor and the oppressed, you start to realize, well, that's not a universal condition. Because even in the face of oppression, there are some people who excel. And they excel by doing what's right. And if you could understand what was it that motivated them to go against the grain and do what was necessary and do what was right, and you look beyond their prestige. So people talk about the Rockefellers, for example. You don't have to like them and you don't have to dislike them, but to amass that kind of fortune and that kind of prestige, what were the characteristics of their behaviors? Now, some of those behaviors you may want to adopt, and some of them you may not want to adopt. But the underlying commonalities between successful people will show you that there are success strategies, whether or not the person's vilified today. There were things that they did, and for everyone that's vilified, you're going to find 2 or 3 people that are not vilified. You're going to find 2 or 3 people that nobody even knows about. So again, you go into your own personal history, you go into your genealogy, you start reading biographies of people that interact. You know what's exciting for me? I like to write. And one of my ancestors actually wrote speeches for Abraham Lincoln. Now, Abraham Lincoln had a team of speechwriters, and as far as I know, my ancestor wasn't on the Gettysburg Address or something. I'm pretty sure it was just everyday speaking. But the concept gave me some inspiration that, hey, maybe this is something built into our DNA. Now, I'm not going to talk about the hereditary traits and behaviors that come with that passing down of genetics. There are, genetic diseases and disorders and behavioral characteristics that are part of the genetics, but I'm not a geneticist, so I'm not even going to talk about that stuff. I can talk about how environment and understanding shapes your behavior and how your behavior then can shape the outcomes that happen to you in life. But you ultimately need to make sure that you are cultivating a culture that has the greatest value to yourself first, your family second. And by the way, you're going to get to a level where your family and your own self is going to be at the same level. When you're a single person, you're going to focus on your own skills to make yourself the person that has the attraction factor to have a family, to make the family have the attraction factor to have it drawn into certain communities, and to make those communities have a certain factor that they can grow. This is a very complex topic, and of course we can talk about it for much longer, but my time is up here. I have another appointment coming along. But if you have any questions about mass control techniques beyond the one I shared today, let's change it a little bit. If you build up someone's past, you can grow their future. There are values in understanding a broad range of cultures. It gives you a cafeteria option of adopting cultures that are beneficial, behaviors and characteristics that are good and will draw you forward to where you want to be. But ultimately, I can understand you might have some questions about this topic. Now, if you're going to send me hate mail, I don't really care. That's why I make it difficult for people to send me messages, because I don't really want to hear you complain. But if you visit www.insidestrategicrelations.com and you have a sincere question about the implementation of these concepts, about the adaptation of these concepts, then you're going to visit the contact page, you're going to fax, or you're going to mail me a letter. You'll describe the challenge you face and the questions you have, and I'll actually write you back. I'll do a podcast. I'll do something to answer your question, because you're probably starting to recognize there are times where people's histories are forcefully removed. People are told things about who they are that has nothing to do with their actual character or the concept of who they are. And I'm arguing that it's your responsibility. And then if you take that responsibility and cultivate your character and understand your situation and use critical thinking, that you'll actually come out better off for the challenges that you face. I know it's hard to think about that when you're facing the challenges, but iron sharpens iron. A statue is produced by removing what is not the image or the statue. You can become a craftsman or craftswoman or craftsperson of your own destiny. But there are some key things to understand. They all are tied to relationships because people really, isolated all by yourself, a person really is like if a tree falls in the forest type of thing. People are made better through their interactions. People are made better through their understandings of other people. And this all informs you about your understanding for yourself. So, hey, this has been a broad topic. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. Ask your questions. Do not let a day go by where you haven't asked questions of yourself, you haven't asked questions of your past, and you haven't asked questions that shape your future. Thanks for listening.